Rain hammered the city streets as Mason Drayton raced down the slick sidewalk, his designer coat flapping around his knees. The neon lights of the cafes reflected in puddles, distorting the faces of strangers hurrying past. His heart pounded not just from the sprint, but from panic, the kind that gripped him like icy fingers. His son, Ethan, had slipped out of his hands for barely a minute, and now he was gone. The thought of the tiny boy with curls too fine to hold onto, wandering alone in the storm, made Mason's stomach twist. Ethan, he yelled again, voice hoarse, splashing through puddles, but the echo swallowed his cry. A flash of movement caught his eye. A small figure huddled under a broken awning outside a corner convenience store, shivering violently. Mason's chest lifted. Running closer, he saw a woman crouched over the boy, her dark hair plastered to her face by rain, coat ragged and soaked through, hands cupping Ethan's tiny cheeks. She murmured softly, rocking him, "SHH. It's okay, you're safe now." Mason froze, the words hanging in the air, surreal against the chaos of the city. The woman looked up, and Mason's gaze locked on eyes that mirrored exhaustion itself. Dark rings, pale skin, lips quivering slightly. Yet in them was a strange calm, a dignity that refused to break. He's yours." Her voice was wary, cautious, almost fragile. Mason nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, oh God, yes." She hesitated, then handed Ethan to him. The boy's tiny fingers curled around Mason's jacket, still trembling. Mason noticed the woman's shoes first, worn through at the heels, duct tape holding the soles together, and the faint stain of old coffee on the sleeves of her coat. Her hands were red from cold, nails broken, and she clutched a canvas bag so threadbare it threatened to tear with every movement. She looked like someone life had beaten, but she carried herself as if refusing to crumble entirely. "I found him near the subway entrance," she said, voice low. "He wandered off when I was buying my breakfast. I couldn't just leave him." Mason's chest tightened, guilt gnawing at him. He was used to solving problems with a wire transfer or a nod from his assistant, but this was a vulnerability that no money could fix. He glanced at her, taking in her soaked hair, tired posture, and the way her coat clung to her thin frame, and felt a strange mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you, truly," he whispered, holding Ethan closer. "Can I do something for you?" She shook her head, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No, I couldn't stand seeing him scared." Her eyes darted to the neon-lit street, then back to Mason. There was a flicker, almost imperceptible, of pain that she tried to mask with a faint smile. They stood in silence, rain drumming around them, and Mason realized how little he knew about the world beyond his penthouse towers and chauffeur-driven cars. His child, safe now, rested his head against Mason's chest, still shivering, oblivious to the storm and to the fact that a stranger had saved him from it. Finally, Mason spoke. "There must be something I can do, anything. A place to stay tonight, food, money." She shook her head again, but he caught the faint quiver in her lips, the hesitation in her eyes. Something told him she wasn't used to offers being genuine. You don't know me," she said finally. I'm not someone people help." Mason studied her, noticing the remnants of a city, weary life etched into every line of her face, faint bruises on her knuckles, a small tear at the seam of her coat pocket, the frayed strap of her bag threatening to snap. She wasn't just poor, she was surviving, scraping by in ways he had never imagined. And yet, in that moment, she had saved his son without hesitation. "I do know you now," Mason said softly, "and I don't care about the past. You saved my son. That's enough for me to care about you." Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of disbelief before she looked away. I didn't want him to be alone, that's all." Mason exhaled slowly. He wanted to offer more, wanted to tear down the walls of her hesitation, but the city swallowed his words. The rain was relentless, and the distant wail of sirens reminded him that time was moving. And yet nothing in the world felt more urgent than this one woman, this one moment, this one act of courage. He bent down slightly, brushing a wet lock of hair from Ethan's forehead. "He's safe now. I promise you he's safe. Please, let me at least buy you a dry coffee, one warm cup." She hesitated, the barest twitch of a smile forming. "Okay, maybe one." As they turned toward the corner cafe, Mason felt an unfamiliar weight settle over him, a mix of relief, awe, and something he couldn't quite name. He noticed the subtle tremble in her hands, the nervous glance she gave to the cafe windows, and a flicker of vulnerability that mirrored the boy he held. He had no idea who she was, where she had come from, or what this night would bring, but something deep inside told him that this encounter would change everything. And then, as Mason pushed open the door to the cafe, her whisper brushed his ear. "Be careful. People like me, we disappear." Mason froze, heart thudding. Her words were soft, almost like a warning, but the tremor in her voice carried a weight that made him uneasy. He looked down at Ethan, asleep against his chest, then back at her, and realized he might never see her again, unless he did something, right now. The storm outside raged on, and in that small, warm cafe, a fragile bond had begun, but its survival hung by the thinnest of threads. The cafe smelled of roasted coffee and warm pastries, a sharp contrast to the wet chill outside. Mason slid into a booth, Ethan resting against his shoulder, and offered the woman a chair. She hesitated, then lowered herself cautiously, as if the furniture might judge her. Her coat dripped onto the floor, and Mason quickly offered a napkin. She shook her head, eyes down, fidgeting with the strap of her bag. "I'm Mason," he said gently, "Ethan's dad. I really want to thank you properly. Can I at least know your name?" "Clara," she replied softly, voice barely above the cafe hum. Her gaze flicked to Ethan, then away again. There was an edge of wariness in her posture, the way she crossed her legs tightly, hands pressed together like she could fold herself smaller if she needed to. Mason studied her, noticing details he couldn't have seen in the rain, the faint scars along her wrists, the way her shoes were patched repeatedly with glue and stitching, the thinness of her frame under the soaked coat. She wasn't just tired, she was worn by life, and yet there was a quiet strength to her, a dignity in the way she held herself even while shivering and exhausted. "I want to help," Mason said, his voice firm but kind. "Not just tonight, not just because of what happened. I want to make sure you're safe, warm, and not invisible anymore." Clara blinked, caught off guard. Her lips pressed into a tight line, then softened as she whispered, "People like you, people with money, they offer help like it's a transaction. I can't just take it." Mason leaned in, his eyes steady. "This isn't about money. It's about what you did. You saved my son, Clara. That's bigger than any check I could write." A silence fell between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Ethan stirred, his small hand curling around Mason's finger, and Clara's eyes softened. Mason could see the internal debate flickering in her expression, the urge to protect herself clashing with the warmth of having been noticed, truly noticed, for the first time in a long while. I don't have a place to go," she finally admitted, voice trembling slightly. "The shelter is full, my apartment. I lost it last month. There's nothing." Mason's chest tightened. He felt the invisible walls of his world crack open, letting a cold reality in, one he had been insulated from. He reached across the table, placing a hand gently over hers. "Then we'll fix that. You don't have to go back to the streets tonight, and you won't have to go back ever again if you don't want to." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she looked down at her worn hands and whispered, I don't know how to do normal life anymore. I've been surviving for so long." "Then let me help you learn," Mason said softly, "step by step. I won't rush you. No judgments, just help." Outside, the rain began to ease, leaving streets glistening under neon reflections. Inside the cafe, Mason and Clara found themselves talking quietly. sharing fragments of life, small confessions, and careful laughter. She told him about the jobs she had lost, the bills she couldn't pay, the nights spent on park benches or in shelters that smelled of bleach and despair. He listened, absorbing each detail, each subtle hardship, the tattered backpack she carried everywhere, the coins she counted to make sure she could afford a single bus transfer, the empty fridge she faced each morning. By the time the cafe was closing, Mason had made a decision. "Come with me," he said gently. "Tonight, you'll stay somewhere warm. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest. You don't have to do this alone." Clara hesitated, glancing at Ethan asleep against Mason's chest. Her lips trembled, and for a moment she seemed ready to retreat into old habits, to vanish like she warned she might. But then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. Mason led her out into the night. The air was crisp, almost clean after the storm. A car waited, waiting for them like a silent promise. Clara glanced at the luxury vehicle, then back at Mason, a flicker of skepticism in her eyes. He smiled reassuringly, and she allowed herself to climb in, still holding on to the faint thread of hope that someone could, just maybe, change her life. The next morning, the city awoke to a golden sunrise, and in Mason's penthouse, Ethan slept peacefully while Clara sat by the window, a cup of hot coffee warming her hands. Mason watched her from across the room, noticing the way she wrapped the towel around her shoulders, the careful way she lifted the cup to her lips, small motions that were both delicate and deliberate. She was tired, yes, but she was beginning to feel safe. "You're really serious about this?" she said finally, breaking the silence. "I am," Mason replied, smiling. "You saved my son last night. Now it's my turn to make sure you don't have to fight alone anymore." Clara let out a shaky laugh, the kind that comes after years of holding back tears. "I don't even know how to do this," she admitted. "Then we'll learn together," Mason said. "One step at a time. You're not invisible anymore, Clara, not to me. Not to anyone who sees what you've done, the strength you have, the courage it takes just to keep going." For the first time in years, Clara felt something that wasn't fear or exhaustion. It was hope. A fragile, tender hope that maybe, just maybe, generosity could reroute a life. That kindness wasn't just a word people used but a force that could change everything. And as she watched Ethan stir and smile at her, reaching tiny hands toward her, Clara realized she didn't have to disappear anymore. She could stay, she could belong, she could let someone see her, and trust that they wouldn't let her vanish. In that moment, Mason knew something he had always understood in business, but rarely in life. The greatest investment wasn't money. It was trust, compassion, and the courage to extend a hand when it mattered most. And sometimes a single act of generosity could save not just one life, but 3 hearts forever entwined. Clara looked out at the city below, the skyline shimmering with morning light, and whispered softly, "Thank you for noticing me." Mason smiled, and for the first time, the world outside the penthouse felt like it could finally be shared, with hope, dignity, and a second chance. The moral lingered quietly, unspoken but undeniable. One act of kindness could reroute a life, and noticing someone in need could be the first step toward rewriting their story.